Space whales? Nope, rather deal with devils. Chapter 34, Fiction by Azazyel. There wasn't anything else of note said. In just a couple of minutes, Sona and Rias took us to the back lot of the school behind the old schoolhouse building, and Koneko and I were squaring off against one another. Koneko was fighting for sweets. Actually, why am I even fighting? I am not getting paid. I asked aloud as I realized Koneko, regardless of winning, was getting her sweets budget doubled. And I wasn't getting anything. But as I was about to say something more pointed to Sona, she spoke up without me having to say anything. You want to go to the familiar forest, correct? Then win. All my peerage members already have a single familiar or more. This whole competition was your idea, and for your benefit. She said sharply. At that, I could only nod and shut up when it was pointed out that way. With that, I looked back at Koneko, and she met my eyes while pulling her MMA gloves down onto her hand with the sound of leather stretching, with her merciless feline-like eyes glaring into mine with terrible purpose. Alright, you guys fight whenever you are ready. Rias called out encouragingly, and without a single word, Koneko dashed forward towards me, not giving me any time to prepare the field, knowing I was Sona's contracted magician. But as she dashed forward, I summoned my demonic blade Soul Edge, and as her eyes widened, I fully opened my own eyes to the world, as I could see the lines of death perfectly fine here in the DXD world still. Regardless, I brought down my sword onto a line of death in the ground, and with a loud crashing noise, I killed the cohesion in the ground, making the ground in front of me turn into loose gravel that made Koneko's charge falter as her charge on the previously hard ground turned into her trying to sprint over loose sand basically. With Koneko adjusting herself, I stabbed Soul Edge into the ground beside me. Steadfastly ignoring Rias, who squealed about how my sword looked exactly like Soul Edge and was fruitlessly trying to get Sona to trade the contract to her. But after I locked my large sword into the ground, I held my hands up and called up a Citri magical glyph. Using the Citri water, I made several large, thick tentacle constructs out of water that swung and whipped at Koneko, who cursed loudly. Jake is a pervert. But I just retorted flatly. The tentacles are to smash you into the ground and bind you. Not anything lewd. My words proved prophetic as Koneko couldn't dodge the 36 or so tentacles I created for long. As one of the solid water constructs finally linked around Koneko's ankle and fused together into a ring around that ankle, I could see the moment Koneko's mind went oh shit. As the water tentacle whipped her out of the air, and with a loud crashing noise slammed her face first into the ground at great speed. You surrender? I asked as Koneko was lying there for a second as I asked, but as I walked forward a bit, I saw her kick the majority of the water construct off with her other foot, and then she used her hands and now freed legs to pounce towards me. But with one tentacle, I could whip her around so that she leapt towards me using the ground as leverage to increase her speed. All she did was become a blur that slammed into a dozen water tendrils that held her up in the air as I idly moved the Citri glyph behind my back, so it was like the water tendrils were sprouting from my back as 3 of the dozen tendrils held up each limb of hers securely. Ah! Is this enough? I asked Rias, who pouted at how Koneko's pure physical abilities couldn't get past the stretching water constructs that held her helpless in the air. But even as Rias nodded glumly, I heard something that made my lips twitch. Wait. I fought, and my clothes didn't get torn off. Koneko muttered as I lowered her to the ground, and then she looked up at me and gave me a lazy thumbs up as she deadpanned. Despite you being a pervert who uses tentacles in a fight. Thank you for not drenching me in the cold water or tearing off my clothes. With her wearing bloomers and a white shirt for this fight. Yeah, it's fine, I said wryly as Koneko nodded her head towards me in respect before walking over to Rias, who was still pouting and looking at Sona pitifully, who was not at all being a gracious victor as she looked down at her rival down her nose past her glasses. Once Sona was done, being smug, and the details for the trip to the familiar forest were settled for going there later tonight at midnight, as that's when it opened to us. I talked a bit with Sona's peerage while Mommy all but plastered herself to my side. So Momo, you got any plans tomorrow afternoon? I would like to workshop some magical ideas with you. I asked, as I had some interesting ideas that I could do with the devil's imagination-based magic. Beyond my student council duties, and maybe doing a couple devil contracts, I will be free in the late afternoon, Momo said with a small smile, but before I could set a time, I heard a light cough as Tsubaki spoke up. Actually, would it be alright if I joined in as well? Tsubaki asked while folding her arms under her chest, and we all wore a wry smile as Sona stalked off from the small table her and Rias were sharing with Tsubaki, quickly adding on. Sona has told me great things about your magical ingenuity. And using my sacred gear, we can safely test some magic if you would have me. She explained, and I was reminded about her sacred mirror, Mirror Alice, which could absorb attacks. So, with a possible safety net being offered, who was I to deny that? So an agreement was made and a time made for our little study session as Sona got us moving back into our side of the school to wait for the time for us to go to the familiar forest.